Now, the British public are turning their backs on the BBC in their millions. A record 2.84 million people are no longer willing to pay the licence fee because they don't watch BBC channels or any kind of live TV. That, my friends, is 360,000 more people refusing to pay than this time last year. Even the government don't think the licence fee is £159 well spent. Ministers are due to launch a formal review into the BBC's funding this autumn. Well, former Conservative Culture Minister Lord Ed Vaizey back with me, and I'm also joined by Democratic Unionist Party MP Sammy Wilson. Sammy, hold on there. Thank you. Ed, you've always been a devout follower of the BBC. These figures, though, don't make good reading. 2.84 million people.
They don't make good reading. I can't sort of unpack them in the sense of how accurate they are or what they actually mean. But it is interesting. I mean, we did look at this in 2015 about the licence fee. The licence fee, you were quoting Churchill earlier. Churchill famously said about democracy, it's the least worst option. You keep coming back to the licence fee as the least worst option of funding the BBC if you want it to be independently funded and have a secure income. But seeing a figure like that, and as I say, I don't know how it's arrived at, there is a feeling, I think, that maybe at some point the licence fee carries on like this and then there's just suddenly a tipping point when viewing habits change so fundamentally that it becomes almost impossible to justify. I've always been completely open-minded about how you would fund the BBC. And thinking just anecdotally... I
don't think this model is sustainable.
But thinking anecdotally from my own experience, I don't listen to BBC radio anymore. I listen to Times radio.
Haven't you got a show on Times?
Yes, I do.
When is that?
Well, it's on a Friday night, but this week I'm covering Mariella Fristrup between 1 and 3.
Excellent. OK, good. Great.
But I also tend to watch streaming,
yes.
TV series. Some of those will be BBC streamings. Yeah. And I watch religiously at 7 o'clock Jeremy Kyle live, unless I'm appearing on the programme. The point I'm making is there's now much more choice. People are migrating. It sounds potentially plausible that people are saying this, and there may just come a tipping point, which comes very quickly. Sometimes you think you've got 5 years, 10 years, but it could happen almost overnight where people say, actually, this is not sustainable.
I think that's very good. Sammy Wilson, welcome to Jeremy Kyle Live. You've long campaigned for the BBC licence fee to be abolished, and it's interesting. I mean, I don't think this model, this funding model, is sustainable. I think Ed's absolutely right. People's viewing habits and watching habits have changed, have they not?
It's not sustainable, and I'm surprised that Ed can't give a commitment that the government would actually move away from this and start the BBC preparing for a new future, which without the licence fee. I mean, the licence fee is a scandalous poll tax. It's regressive. It's imposed on many people. In fact, more than half the population don't actually use the BBC for news, for their main TV watching, etc., and yet they're forced to pay for it. And I would have thought that if the Conservative government does not grasp this nettle, the one thing you can be sure of is that a Labour Party, if it takes over in the future, will not, because of course the BBC regards the Labour Party as their darlings, and quite often, of course, pumps out left-wing propaganda. Another reason why I oppose having to pay for a service which I don't want, which in many cases I find does not reflect my views, and yet I have to pay for it.
I think also, Ed, and I know that you have I mean, Sam is passionate and I'm passionate, but let me give you an example why, you know, ministers are going to look into reforms, a review, right? You've always said to me, people don't know how lucky they are. I think people's frustration... Let me read you a story over the weekend. The BBC's annual diversity survey, you're laughing, but for the local democracy reporters, it did not include the category, or whatever it is going to call it, of heterosexual. Other sexual orientation was the only option for straight people. Options: are you bisexual, a gay man, a lesbian, prefer not to say, or other sexual orientation. It is not surprising, is it not? You're laughing that people go, the BBC are turning into a bunch of diverse idiots.
It's a very funny story. And the BBC is like the dad dancing corporation. I mean, it just makes a fool of itself.
They said it's an admin error. We've missed out heterosexual. That's our state broadcaster.
I think the BBC is so straight and so heterosexual that it just omitted to put in the obvious box to check.
But would you?
But I don't think the future of the BBC rests on a survey of local reports.
No, it isn't. But
about whether or not the word "straight."
But Sammy, can you imagine the uproar if they hadn't included trans or bisexual or lesbian. But I'll tell you what, let's leave heterosexual out because the world's
What do you
gone...
mean? What is this? This is uproar. This is uproar.
Well, it is uproar
from
because
the
it annoys me.
representative of the straight community who is using his podium to cause uproar.
Sammy was order, Sammy.
Jeremy, what I think a lot of people will say watching this programme is that Ed can laugh off this survey where heterosexuals are disregarded by BBC. My view of this is that this reflects the deep-seated problem with the BBC.
Completely agree.
That it doesn't represent ordinary people any longer. And whether that's true about sexual orientation surveys or its view on Brexit or its view on climate change or its view on elites imposing their will on people. And don't forget, I mean, this is what happens, of course. The BBC now decides for using my money and using your money and everybody else's money, decides what is good news, what is bad news, what slant the news should have, what news should be reported. And deep-seated within the BBC, I believe, is this bias. And that survey, while you may laugh about it, that survey shows the deep-seated bias within the BBC, where it's now chasing this agenda that minority sexual orientations should be promoted.
I really don't think the BBC are promoting that.
No, but you're
I'm laughing.
and
I am laughing.
Right,
this is a great comedy segment from the Jeremy and Sammy show.
Deep-seated bias
you are
amongst
now
the
reading
BBC.
in this kind of BBC conspiracy to turn everybody gay or something. I mean, it's crazy.
No, and that's not what I said. I said it reflects the
It
thinking
does
within
not.
the
Every
BBC.
company does surveys like this. Even Times Radio has diversity targets in who appears on its programmes.
The views of ordinary people and indeed the opinions of the majority of population do not have and are not properly reflected.
I think that is
Are
complete
straight
and
white
utter
male,
nonsense.
are straight white male and female people allowed to be on and listen to Times Radio? Yes or no?
Yes, they are.
Well, apparently,
And
according to the
they're also allowed
BBC,
to
if you're
be on the
straight, not
BBC.
gay, and you're white and you're male or female,
they're
you're
allowed-
stuffed. I'm being serious, man.
To be on the BBC.
What's wrong with him? Sammy, I'm with you, mate. You know what liberals do, don't they? Apart from failing to get in the cabinet. What they do is, when they haven't got an answer, they laugh. You're wrong here,
It's
mate.
not
People
for
are
me
hacked
to
off.
promote a rival broadcaster in the BBC.
Jeremy,
but,
and Jeremy,
are you telling me
you're
that millions of
absolutely
normal
right.
people are not listening to BBC Radio 2, for example? Which is
They've turned
about
off
as
in their droves since
mainstream-
Ken Bruce
about
left.
as mainstream as it possibly
No,
could
since
be.
Ken Bruce
and you
left,
did the
they've
same
turned
with
off.
Ken Bruce. It's a conspiracy to take away ordinary broadcasters when Ken Bruce had been offered a very nice package by a rival commercial
Next time you come on,
broadcaster.
you've got to have a shave. Final word, Sammy Wilson. I agree with you, my friend. It's an the BBC needs to be, on a serious note, more answerable, doesn't it?
No, I think that the BBC needs to be put in the marketplace along with all of the other competitors that will give us all a better service. You subscribe to those services you want to subscribe to that provide the services and the kind of programs that you want to hear. You don't subscribe to the ones you don't want to hear and see. And that, to me, is... And I would have thought that Ed Vaizey would have been more, as a Conservative, would have taken that free market approach rather than this public service.
Well, don't forget, Sammy, Conservatives believe in institutions. Until the Brexit Party took over and smashed every institution.
Right, listen, you two. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've just had a text message. A text message from my agent saying I can get Lord Ed Vaizey a job on BBC Radio. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. This is Jeremy Carr live. And